So, In Quest of Truth, or How I Came to Mayor Baba. And that's by Irene Coney, an autobiography by Irene Conybeare, published by Swami Satya Prakash Udasin, Kakinada, A period P period. Is that the province in India,
Yeah,
Mayor?
the state Andhra Pradesh.
Oh,
Ah, ah.
thank you. I would like to acknowledge the help of Professor C.D. Deshmukh, M.A. Ph.D., also of K.K. Ramakrishnan, Secretary, Avatar Mayor Baba Pune Center. I have also to make an acknowledgement to The Awakener, New York, a journal devoted to the mission of Mayor Baba. Printed by J.S. Tilak, Kesari Press, in 568 Narayan Path, Pune, 2. Quote by Mayor Baba, I have come not to teach, but to awaken. This book is humbly and respectfully dedicated to the Avatar Mayor Baba. Special note, although Mayor Baba has given, through gestures interpreted by certain of his disciples, some special features for this book, it should at the same time clearly be understood that the Master does not necessarily agree with the views expressed by the author. Mayor Baba has always allowed full freedom of thought and expression to his followers. Contents, preface, introduction, beginning to search, the flower girl, initiations, Paul Brunton's views on Mayor Baba, illumination and Aldous Huxley, dreaming into the future, India, America, homewards, return to India, Mayor Baba's teachings, return to South Africa, need for the avatar. And the appendix contains Mayor Baba, F.C. Conybeare, Maya by Mayor Baba, reincarnations, thought forms, hereafter, Kundalini Yoga, Aura and the Halo by Mayor Baba, explanation by Mayor Baba, and must. Preface. Some have asked me to rewrite my last book, Civilization or Chaos, in a language more suitable for the general public. I fear this is not possible, for to explain the world crisis in the light of Eastern metaphysics is a task that is not easy. In that work, I tried to diagnose the grave social maladies of our times in the light of the teachings of Mayor Baba. I have also attempted to show that those who are fitted to guide mankind out of the present impasse, that's how that's pronounced, impasse, don't know, are the great ones through whom the Christ or Buddha consciousness can be manifested. Let me just repeat that sentence. I have also attempted to show that those who are fitted to guide mankind out of the present impasse are the great ones through whom the Christ or Buddha consciousness can be manifested. I now feel that instead of rewriting that book, a personal narrative of my quest for truth would be more to the point. So I have written this book in the form of a part autobiography, drawing on the former work where necessary. I feel that the autobiography shows a convincing series of events which led me eventually to Mayor Baba and enables me to answer some of the poignant and soul-searing questions of today, amongst others. Will the sun go down and the stars come out over a dead world? Will our planet become another moon? For are we not living in an apocalyptical, and eschatological age. The authorities write millions of words to diagnose the malady afflicting Homo sapiens and to find the cause of the world unrest. Numerous national and international bodies exist to try to promote mutual sympathy and cooperation, since it must be one world or none. But who can give the right answer? One must look below the surface, into the inner truths and inner realities, into the laws that govern man and the universe. We are, as ever, the slaves of scientific materialism. It is not the collection of more and more facts that is wanted, interesting though they may be. It can be only the spiritual truths which can set us free. These are little studied because they involve some knowledge of the ways of God and his laws. Meanwhile, another war has come and gone, and now we are waiting for the final war to end all wars. Many think our civilization is doomed, not because of its over industrialization and artificiality, but because man's intellectual equipment has outstripped his moral and spiritual development. It is more than 30 years ago since I listened to my father and his friends. They were agreed that our civilization could not last, for misdirected scientific achievements would destroy it. But science cannot be blamed, for it is strife that annihilates. They felt, in fact, that if civilization was to be saved, some form of spiritual compensation must take place. Brought up in the rationalist school, I suffered from religious inhibitions, so was free from all sectarian bias. Later, however, I began to search for the spiritual compensation that must save humanity. For are we not being told on all sides that we need a change of heart to make a better balanced mankind, more capable of coping with the problems of the present day? But how could any change of heart come about? Would it not have to be a cosmic change of heart? And how could that happen except by the grace of God? Some form of divine intervention? But how to believe in omnipotence? For no ordinary human agency could help in a disaster of unlimited dimensions. Marianne, could you unmute and continue?
Yes. I have attempted to answer some of these paralyzing questions in this book, or at least to give a lead to readers who are interested in such questions, for they can, if they will, study this way of thought by following up the various sources alluded to, and those who want testimony can start in search for the manifestation of the divinity that exists in everything and is everywhere. In these days of constantly recurring crises, of distorted values and ideological conflicts, more and more of us are looking for the peace of mind that can only be found in the inner truths and inner realities of existence. Science, hitherto absorbed in the study of visible man and the visible universe, is now beginning to turn its attention to invisible man and the invisible universe. With the advance of parapsychology, radiesthesia, radionics, and above all, metaphysics, there are some of scientific persuasion who are beginning to realize that, quote, a house, a star, and a tree are not what they seem to be, but pointers to a deeper reality which science can never reach, end quote. And that quote is from Explanations in Science by Waldemar Kamfert, science editor of the New York Times, published by the New York Viking Press, 1953.
I could interject here, Marion, please. If y'all don't want to read the the notes, that's fine, because I think they kind of interrupt. But if you want to read them, go ahead.
Okay.
It's up to you, up to the reader.
Okay. See, now to continue. There is now a distinct suspicion that there may be superphysical realities, that man has latent properties within him that cannot be weighed, measured, analyzed, inducted, and deducted. This change of thinking from the more or less materialistic theories of the Victorian age is leading some to an unorthodox approach to ideas involving metaphysics, philosophy, and religion. This new departure is very welcome to pioneers in their struggle for the emancipation of thought from the hidebound traditions carried over from the Victorian era. But at the same blurry, let's see.
Whoops.
But at the same time, there is some anxiety lest the development of present trends carries us too far. For some searchers and investigators, in their zeal, imagine that further elaboration and elucidation of the spiritual verities of life may be assisted by means of clinical experiments, statistical and laboratory tests, and even the use of drugs is advocated. No doubt drugs can be very useful for psychological experiments. And as we know, most remarkable work is being done on what might be called the chemistry of the mind. Drugs are taking the place of the straitjacket and padded room. But it should be understood that drugs cannot possibly affect the great transcendental cosmic experiences. There is an asterisk referring to Drugs and the Mind by Robert S. de Ropp, published by Golianes, 1958. Yet we have certain writers such as Aldous Huxley and ESP students advocating a scientific inquiry into the nature of mysticism. In fact, they go so far as to suggest that the spiritual aspirant in his search for God should seek the cooperation of pharmacology, parapsychology, psychiatry, and psychology for the stimulation and clarification of mystical experience in the transcendental spheres of existence. Then again, some theorists, who usually have no personal acquaintance with the elusive, mysterious, and sometimes dangerous nature of such a quest, also think that the difficult practices indulged in by fakirs and sadhus of the East might be made to produce results without the long and arduous training by the adepts. as if such things could be done so easily and so hastily. We know, so far as the problem of the study of the supernormal faculties of man go in the fields of psychic research, that, despite such painstaking work over many years, we have failed to produce much in the way of tangible results, except for the definite assumption that some part of the personality survives death. The great insuperable mysteries of life and death, of the soul, and of man's ultimate spiritual destiny remain as ever unsolved. Yet there are some so foolishly hazardous that they want to plunge us, by ill-considered methods, still farther into the uncertainty of the unknown. Such people seem to be unaware of the necessity for certain essential qualities that go into the makeup of a spiritual aspirant. Those acquainted with the techniques of spiritual training know that, first of all, the mystic must have arrived at a certain stage of his spiritual evolution before he can even be ready for initiation. He must have certain characteristics, such as an intense urge to find truth or God, and there must be a deliberate desire for the elimination of the ego. This can be helped only by means of self-purification, self-dedication, and self-sacrifice. He should have a tendency to be selfless and to be imbued with a genuine love for humanity and his fellow creatures, the animals. He must, above all, be prepared to live a life of moral discipline if he is to find some detachment from the snares and illusions of ordinary mundane life, as detachment is the only form of lasting happiness. Such a training is easier to find within the precincts of the church, mosque, or temple. But now that growing interest is developing in the West for Eastern thought, we have more and more well-meaning metaphysical and occult schools, sponsored generally by persons, with a few exceptions, who know not so very much more than their students. This may be dangerous when it comes to serious questions involving the physical and mental health of the novice, for there are practices which can lead to the awakening of powers beyond the individual's control, and these can lead to distressing mental breakdowns, thereby adding to the lists of inmates in our already overcrowded asylums. Our lack of spiritual preparedness for shouldering special responsibilities can lead to dire results, even though the motives may have been pure in the beginning. This work does not profess to be an ontological treatise. It is merely for the reasons outlined above that I have ventured to try to clarify some of the issues involved, and not because I have more knowledge or more authority, but I believe that a personal account of some of my experiences when in search could serve others who have undergone the same difficulties as myself, though I must crave indulgence for being neither a scholar nor an authority on the profound subject matter of this book. I also apologize for writing in the first person, but there is no alternative, since it is only by personal experience that one can profit. Theory without practice is useless, and we have too much book knowledge as it is. The path to self-realization that the pilgrim has to tread is long, incredibly long, for the goal takes the toll of many, many lives, before we can reach the peace that passeth all understanding. The most that we can hope for, with very few exceptions, is for a push on the path. It is here that we need a real master to help us. Unfortunately, the opportunities of meeting such masters are not many, as up to now they are only to be found in the East.
Thank you, Marion. Mayor Durrani, can you unmute and continue?
Yeah. Introduction. Mysticism may be described as a form of direct perception of the spirit that is unobtainable through the medium of intellect. Some people are born psychic, others are not. So, some are born mystics and others are not. But it must always be understood that there is a great gulf between psychic experience and mystical experience. For the former belongs to lower spheres of mind, whereas mysticism belongs to higher spheres and can also be entirely independent of the mind. That great soul experiences cannot be formulated or described by the intellect has been asserted by the saints and mystics of all ages. A seeker may sometimes start his search in the beginning through the realms of the semi-subtle spheres, as I did, but he will run the risk of becoming so absorbed within the fields of the astral world that he will go no farther. One might say that psychic research is a kindergarten that can ultimately lead to the schools of mysticism. But again, please understand that I do not imply that this method is by any means necessary. Everything depends on the particular needs and disposition of the seeker. The great majority of real mystics owe their mystical inclinations to the spiritual progress in their former lives and need no incentive. The great mystics and saints also did not need the background of any particular religion or faith, for mystical experiences are more or less identical and belong to all ages and to all the religions. An examination of the esoteric aspects of comparative religion reveals an underlying principle that runs like a golden thread through all the ramifications of the hidden esoteric systems of thought. For we approach the fundamental laws that govern humanity and the universe. There is a voluminous literature relating to the different faiths in which truths regarding the evolution of man have been misunderstood or lost. For unless we have the privilege of close association with a perfect master, who is beyond the limitations of the mind and has therefore transcended Maya or the cosmic illusion, we can at best get only a very partial and often incorrect view of the many sided approaches of the path of self realization. I would like to stress the great difference between occultism and mysticism. Occultism is incomparably more dangerous because in occult practices, man seeks to control the forces of nature, whereas the way of mysticism is impersonal, in the sense that the mystic does not desire power for himself and his research is based on the urge to find truth or God. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. End of quotation. But these subjects cover the hidden aspects of life and of the forces behind it, which are quite inaccessible for study in organized form. Those who teach occultism as a science may have some theoretical knowledge of the facts of immortality and reincarnation, and of the laws governing evolution and the operation of karma. But the masters who guide the destinies of man behind the scenes do not encourage the spread of hidden knowledge. At times, seekers and investigators will be aware that a kind of iron curtain descends, thus far and no farther. This is one of the reasons why well established schools of occult thought in the West, which claim to interpret the mysteries of life, can be so disappointing. Then again, we find these schools are so much at variance with each other and entertain so many conflicting views that the critical student and seeker wanders from one system to another, as I did, becoming hopelessly confused without any real satisfaction or enlightenment. For schools of thought within specific groups keep the mind captive. At the most, we can only get indirect knowledge and help from such teachers because they themselves have not attained to the perfection of all knowledge, such as can be found only in the goal realized masters who possess none of the failings of ordinary men and women. Even though the founders of some of these esoteric groups have been undoubtedly most remarkable personalities in their own right, they can never be regarded as perfect examples of humanity like the great masters. Both in the past and present, such men are seldom seen or even known outside the circles, and the world does not recognize them till after their deaths. Here we have such examples as the saints and great initiates of all ages and of all countries. But in times of great historic crisis, there is always one, the avatar, who comes into the world, and his emergence creates a great landmark in religious history. I have explained to the best of my ability in my former book, Civilization or Chaos, the work of an avatar and his connection with our present age, which is shortly coming to an end. For we are in the last days of a civilization which deserves to perish. So, no need to go into the same details over again. To return once more to the above mentioned esoteric associations, it is notorious that members are inclined to become caught up within the limitations of the groups they have espoused, within the result that they are often strangely unwilling to learn anything new or even to be receptive of prevailing ideas solely because they do not happen to fit in with the teachings of the original founder of their particular school. I do not feel that I'm exaggerating in thinking that bigotry and fanaticism penetrate the closed doors of societies that think they alone have the truth or most of it. We will always find inner cliques within group who are inclined to adopt the holier than thou attitude, which may beget what one can only call spiritual arrogance. True humility consists of a willingness to keep an open mind, always prepared to learn something new. On the subject of occultism, it must be said that only in the hands of the spiritual masters is occult power safe, for by them it is used sparingly and only for the good of humanity as a whole. It should never be used for helping humanity in its material needs. Here I will quote what Meher Baba says in his discourses. Quotation start. The introduction of an uncertain and incalculable factor which the free exercise of occult power would involve is bound to create much confusion and disturbance in the ordinary pursuits of man, who must be left to his own limitations, resources, and possibilities for the equal and uninterrupted working out of the law of karma. End of quotation. The masters use occult power only for the purpose of promoting the purification of humanity and not to promote material ends, not to pander to the baser aspects of human nature. Advanced spiritual aspirants on the path may develop occult powers, but should they do so, they are just as much in need of help as ordinary people with no ambitions towards spiritual development. In such domains, guidance of a master is needed, and those who are content to follow themselves may come to grievous harm unless they are well protected by unseen guides, the semi-subtle spheres, which unfortunately is not always the case. It is here that the example of a spiritual master is so sorely needed, and his protection in matters beyond one's comprehension. Most people attach undue importance to supernatural phenomena and to miracles. The tragedy being that those happenings have nothing to do with the spiritual path and are only a hindrance. It is because of the definite differences between occultism and mysticism and the failure to realize them that we are led into so much danger and confusion. I will again quote Meher Baba. Start. All miracles belong to the phenomenal world, which is the world of shadows. As phenomena, they are subject to change, and nothing that changes can have lasting value. Realization of the eternal truth is an initiation into the unchangeable being, which alone is the supreme reality. And no acquaintance with the occult world or capacity to manipulate its forces can really amount to realization of the truth. Occult phenomena are as much within the domain of false imagination as are ordinary phenomena of the gross world. From the spiritual point of view, the only important thing is to realize divine life and help others to realize it by manifesting it in everyday life, to penetrate into the essence of all being and to realize and to release the fragments of that inner attainment for the guidance and benefit of others by expressing in the world of forms through love, purity, and beauty. This is the sole aim which has any intrinsic and absolute worth. All other happenings, incidents, and attainments can in themselves have no lasting importance.
Thanks, Mayor. Miguel or Gloria, could you unmute and continue?
Chapter 1. Beginning to search. Although not apparently psychic in any way, I was all the same an unusually sensitive child. At the age of 2, so I have been told, I will cry when my mother picked the flowers in the garden, declaring, quote, it hurted them, end quote. Because of an oversensitive nature, the miseries of my childhood were acute and became more so as I grew up. To this day, I remember the horror at finding a wounded bird in a wood, the victim of some autumn shot. I could not understand how any civilized person could tolerate blood sports. Even in childhood, I was weighed down with a quote-unquote guilt complex. When only about 7, or perhaps it was a year later, my brother Jack and I were traveling in Italy with my parents. We stopped at some inn for a night, and he complained of the spiders in his room. I would not allow them to be killed, so I slept with the spiders, and he was moved to another room. We had a wire hairy fox terrier called Pink. He was white with a brown head. Half pink was mine, and half was Jack's. When hard up, I would sell my half for a penny, and when, as a result of some uncle's trip, I became affluent again, I will buy back my half for 6 pence. I adore Pink, and he adored me. Sometimes, having been nasty, I will whip my heart out of my bed. Pink will be so distressed that he will jump up and lick my face, and in his doggy way will try to comfort me. I was, so I understand, a somewhat difficult child. When about 6, I had a scarlet fever, which affected my hearing, but not sufficiently to interfere with my education. I was sent to a boarding school at Brinton at an early age. Children being often instinctively cruel and thoughtless, I was not happy to begin with. I was passionately fond of music and played the solo in the Brighton Orchestra. I see myself now, a frightened little blue-eyed, fair-haired child in a white frock with a blue sash, compelled to play in the concerts. Such events always fill me with terror, for I had enough sense to know that I was not talented enough. But playing in an orchestra is one of the greatest joys in my life. Being a bit of an athlete, I became captain of the school. I think my passionate defense for the underdog started from those days. My teenage existence was entirely frivolous. Being keen in hockey, I played for Oxford City and toured the country for matches. I also loved dancing and will go on dancing all night to the strains of The Merry Widow and The Chocolate Soldier, up to breakfast time at the commemoration balls. As I look back, I see myself as a somewhat spoiled and imperious girl accustomed to having her own way. But I remember there were always difficulties over quote unquote Mrs. Grundy.
Have no idea what that means.
Right.
Maestra.
I was not allowed to play golf with a young man unless we had a middle-aged chaperone to accompany us around the golf course. One evening, there was quite a to-do when my dear parents discovered that I had danced 4 times with the same young man. But even while amusing myself, I always had the nagging thought at the back of my mind that I should be doing something for the underprivileged. My sin was all that I could and would not do. The stirrings of independence for women were just beginning, and I was wholeheartedly in the movement, for I deeply resented the inequalities between the sexes. Nevertheless, those were gracious days, and I look back with a certain nostalgia for the charm and dignity of an age that prevailed in my youth, so noticeably absent now. My father, though preoccupied with religion all his life, since the study of Christian origins was his chief work, remained more or less an agnostic. Coming of a long line of churchmen, I think he and his brothers suffered from a reaction during their generation. For although they were brought up in the proper Christian tradition, with household prayers every morning, they all became agnostic in their outlook. My brother and I had no religious instruction except at school. When children, we were not allowed to read the Old Testament, but there was that horrified peep in which I discovered that Jehovah enjoyed the quote sweet savor end quote and quote burnt offerings end quote of sacrificial animals in much the same manner as the gods of present day savages are supposed to be propitiated by the blood and reek of their victims. Coming of a family of scholars for the last 400 years gave me, I suppose, an inherent intellectual outlook, but life seemed more and more without sense or significance in spite of the brilliant milieu of clever young men and savants. There was always something missing. Even in the midst of those carefree days, I had what Mel Baba calls, quote, the disgust for life, end quote. The men who turned my thoughts to deeper matters were Professor William McDougall of Oxford and Harvard, who sponsored the parapsychological department at Duke University, and Professor Canning Schiller, the Aristotelian scholar. But I owed most to my friendship with Dudley Diabank Wright, FRCS, the London surgeon who became famous for his use of the divining rod for diagnosing disease. He was a true cavalier sans peur et sans reproche. In 1913, shortly before the war started, I married a young army man and so shared with other young wives the pain and strain of separation during those dreadful war years. Although my husband was only a subaltern when the war began, he soon rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel within a few months of service in France. Because his battalion was almost decimated during the Battle of the Somme. He was shot through both legs in the massacre of Delville Wood, where the German barrage was so intense that the trees were stripped of their leaves, standing stark and naked in the shambles.
Thanks, Miguel. Gloria, please.
A promising military career was cut short when he was eventually invalided out in 1922. The sadness and horror of the war and the loss of so many Oxford comrades, friends from childhood cast a shadow over my young life. I could never forget those brilliant, insouciant boys nurtured in the security and prosperity of the Edwardian age. I personally saw nothing of the war except to hear machine gunning and zooming of planes overhead. And one night we saw a Zeppelin brought down in flames. But across the sea, the constant booming of the guns in Flanders kept us in mind of what was going on all the time. The shock of my father's sudden death in 1924 added to the gloom, and gradually my attention was drawn to the deeper truths he'd heard outside my ken. In 1918, towards the termination of the war, I had a fall that must have injured my spine without my knowing it. For from that time, life became a misery because of constant eye strain. No doctor or occultist could explain these eye headaches, and it was not till 1934 that I heard of Wright and his divining rod. The rod pointed to the back of my neck, and it was explained that there was nothing wrong with my eyes, as I imagined, but that the seat of the trouble was in the back of my neck. Now that I realized that my spine was the cause of my trouble, I went to a chiropractor at Geneva who confirmed Wright's diagnosis by taking a full-length film of my spine, and it showed that the coccyx had been damaged in the fall, and there was a slight list in the spine up to the neck vertebrae, and the head was not quite on its axis, causing much congestion in the back of the neck. Why do not more of the medical profession make use of the divining rod, which can do many other things besides finding water? I was therefore able to get more relief from chiropractic treatment, but it was later in 1952 that I tried the Matthias Alexander technique for the release of tension, which also greatly helped, and when in India, a friend showed me certain yogi postures which were of great benefit. The reason why I bored the reader with all these details, in case somebody reading this book suffers the same way, he or she may benefit by my experience. I am sure if only I had known about some of the Western school of yoga in my youth, I may have been cured instead of being only able to get a certain amount of relief at times, thus spending my life in a state of frustration caused by perpetual eye strain, unable to do any work satisfactorily or to accomplish properly anything that I set out to do. Since I have always been the happiest amidst my books, this form of small martyrdom brought me eventually to study mental science theories and later to an interest in the supernormal faculties. It was at about this time that I was staying in a London hotel in 1934 when I met two young men who were responsive to experiments. One was an Austrian boy. When he was departing for Vienna, he asked me to be sure and quote him when he was crossing the channel, as he feared the voyage. I promised to think of him when the boat left over at 8 o'clock that evening. However, I happened to go out to dinner and I forgot all about him, remembering only on my return home late. Long after the crossing was finished, a few days later, I got a most enthusiastic letter from Vienna telling me that I was marvelous and that he had been one of the few who was not sick, as it had been an extremely rough crossing. The other young man was a Hungarian, the son of a doctor. He suffered much from sciatica in our damp climate, since he was scientifically inclined, and I did not think to interest him in my ideas. But one night, feeling distressed about him, I, quote, quote, treated him without his knowing about it. The next morning, he surprised me by saying, quote, funny, but I woke up this morning feeling a different person with all the pain quite gone, end quote. While I found I could do a little for others, I was quite unable to do anything for myself. The year 1934 proved to be the turning point in my life, for the inquiry into the unknown was starting and psychic research was the first step. Here, Mr. Wright's advice and help proved to be invaluable. An interesting fact about my father should here be mentioned. Irritated by the attacks of the church at the beginning of the century on Darwin and Huxley and the new scientific approach, he wrote a book for the layman. This retaliatory work, Myth, Magic, and Morals, which he gave to the rationalist press in 1909, was a most devastating attack on Orthodox Christianity and played a very considerable part in influencing the mind of the younger generations toward materialistic strengths. During his lifetime, my father was extremely skeptical, with no belief in supernormal phenomena or of personal survival after death. So the retaining of consciousness after his demise came as a complete surprise, and he was obliged to overhaul many of his previous convictions. He also regretted the destructive tendencies of the book referred to above. He was therefore anxious to establish communication with me and to prove his post-mortem existence. No doubt he influenced me subconsciously towards that end, for a friend after some difficulty managed to persuade me to visit a trance medium. In those days, I had regarded spiritualism as pure charlatanry, and knowing nothing whatever about it, I was as bigoted as anybody could be. Through her, I established contact with my father's personality. To begin with, it was extremely difficult to accept his claim to survival, but there was so much evidence that I was unable to refute, quite apart from his extremely convincing scholarly characteristics, which none could imitate. He requested me to help him to prove his post-mortem existence to some of his Oxford colleagues, a request I could hardly refuse, difficult though I knew it would be. He also prompted me to take up mental mediumship, and in this study, I had the help and cooperation of a professional medium who did automatic writings, the late Mrs. Hester Dowden, a lady of the highest personal integrity whose great psychic gifts were well known in London physical circles. I owe her a debt of gratitude which can never be repaid.
Thanks, Gloria. So we'll stop here at the top of page 9.